Now, the first aspect of the triple refuge, as you remember, is the Buddha. And again, we were primarily referring there to our historical Buddha, the man who lived, reached enlightenment, and died roughly 2,500 years ago, again, somewhere between the 6th and 4th centuries before the Common Era. But I mentioned that our Buddha is not the only Buddha who has ever existed. Even in the early Buddhist teachings, we discover that there have been countless Buddhas prior to our Buddha, and countless Buddhas will come after our Buddha. Remember when in Hinduism we talked about the cyclical understanding of time within many Eastern traditions. Here we see that again. There is not just one Buddha. There is not a first and a last Buddha. There are countless Buddhas who enter our world in order to do one major thing, which is to turn the Dharma wheel. The idea is that these Buddhas, when they become Buddhas on this earth, are supremely enlightened beings who have built up so much compassion over all of their lifetimes that they will be ready to assist all other living beings in seeking spiritual progress, eventually seeking enlightenment or nirvana. And to do so, they need to teach us how to make progress on the spiritual path. And in order to do that, they must turn the wheel of Dharma. This is the imagery used to describe what happens when a Buddha begins to teach the path to enlightenment. He turns that wheel of Dharma. Remember Dharma, the eternally true teachings of our Buddha, and in this case, of any Buddha. Whenever a Buddha teaches the Dharma, it is the same Dharma. Yes, perhaps tailored to a specific set of circumstances and historical context, but it is the same basic teaching that is given, the same Dharma that is then entered into the world by the turning of the wheel of Dharma. So that's what Buddhas do when they come into our world. Now, the story of our Buddha actually has to begin long before 2,500 years ago. That is only when he came in his final lifetime in order to become our Buddha and to turn the wheel of Dharma for us, right? But the story of our Buddha actually begins in an age long, long ago in the time of another Buddha. Not just the Buddha before our Buddha, but a Buddha ages and ages, eons and eons ago. When you read some of the early Buddhist texts, they are talking about very large numbers of years when talking about how long ago the journey of our Buddha to be actually had its origin. So this is a long, long time ago where a young boy has just finished his schooling. Again, he's not yet our Buddha. He will not be our Buddha until he is born and eventually reaches enlightenment 2,500 years ago. But he has finished his schooling and he comes down and he sees that his village is all decked out, ready for a big party, it seems. And he wonders if maybe they are ready to celebrate his graduation, how smart he was at completing his studies, especially his religious studies. And he meets a young girl and he kind of asks what's going on in the city. And the girl says, "Oh, you haven't heard. The Lord Buddha, Dipankara, is coming here today." So this is Dipankara, who is an earlier Buddha, not just the Buddha before ours, but a Buddha many Buddhas ago. The idea is that usually you have a new Buddha maybe every 10,000 years or so. The idea again is that a Buddha comes, turns that wheel, and then dies and leaves us behind to remember those teachings. But eventually those teachings start to be forgotten. And that's when that wheel slows down, and eventually comes to a stop. That's when a new Buddha has to emerge. So this is many, many eons ago. The Buddha Dipankara is the Buddha of that historical age. And this young boy all of a sudden realizes that he needs to make sure that he sees this Buddha, this enlightened being who is coming to the city. The girl actually has lotus flowers, petals of lotus flowers that she is going to throw down on the path before the Buddha as a sign of respect. So the boy actually ends up buying some of those flowers, and we have a couple different kind of accounts of what happens when the Buddha comes to where the boy and the girl are. In one account, the boy and the girl toss their lotus flowers into the air, and they remain suspended in the air, circling around the Buddha Dipankara, as he comes and meets them. In another version, people are kind of filling different potholes that are in the road, and that way Dipankara won't have to perhaps step into a pothole where there might be mud and trip or fall or anything like that. And the boy recognizes one of the potholes is not filled. And the story tells us that he actually curls up inside of the pothole so that the Buddha Dipankara can step on him rather than stepping into the pothole, right? Whatever actually happened there, the stories eventually tell us that a conversation begins between Dipankara, the Buddha of that previous historical age, and this young boy, who again is eventually, after many, many, many lifetimes, going to be our Buddha. And in that conversation, the young boy vows to one day become a Buddha like Dipankara. And in doing so, he is taking what is called the Bodhisattva vow, the vow to one day become a Buddha and to turn that wheel of Dharma for a future historical age. Dipankara accepts that vow being taken by that young boy, and that really begins the journey of our Buddha to be, right? He's not yet our Buddha. He will not be our Buddha until 2,500 years ago when he achieves enlightenment in his final lifetime on earth. But with the taking of the Bodhisattva vow, his journey begins, right? Now, when our Buddha actually became our Buddha, part of his enlightenment contained the ability to remember all of his previous lifetimes of preparation that were leading him up to the lifetime where he became our Buddha. And he told his disciples about 500 of these previous lifetime stories. And these are collected in what is called the Jataka, the term that I've typed here for you. Jataka, usually translated as birth stories. These are the various stories of the lifetimes of our Buddha to be when he was still a Bodhisattva in training to become a Buddha, whenever it was his turn to turn the wheel of Dharma, which had stopped from the turning of the previous Buddha. So these Jataka, very well known, very loved by many Buddhists. There are many favorites. My favorite from studying the Jataka is the story of the hungry tigress. And in this lifetime of the Bodhisattva, who will eventually become our Buddha, he is a prince, and he goes out and walks kind of in the forest with his brothers, and eventually they come across a hungry tigress, a female tiger who has her cubs, her baby tigers with her, and it's clear that she doesn't have the strength to get food, and therefore, if nothing else changes, she and the baby tigers will all die soon. And the other brothers kind of just leave the situation behind, but our Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva, who doesn't know that he's taken a Bodhisattva vow, right? He's not going to remember previous lifetimes until he becomes our Buddha. But he has such compassion on that hungry tigress that he actually goes over and lies down right next to her, hoping that she will maybe consume his flesh, which will allow her to have the strength to live and to provide for her cubs so that they can live. However, she's too weak to even lift her head to take a bite out of this man. So he goes out, he finds a piece of bamboo, he sharpens it up, he lies right down in front of this female tiger, and he slits his throat so that the blood starts pouring out, and the tigress is able to start licking up that blood. And through that sacrifice, she is able to gain the strength to eventually get up and consume his flesh and to allow herself and her cubs to survive. That's just one of the stories of the lifetimes of preparation for our Buddha when he was trying to develop the sufficient amount of compassion that would allow him to become a Buddha when it was his turn, which happened 2,500 years ago. So remember, in all of these different lifetimes, he doesn't know that he has taken a Bodhisattva vow, that he is preparing to become a Buddha, because he can't remember his previous lifetimes. That will only happen when he becomes a Buddha 2,500 years ago and reaches enlightenment. But he's working his way through these lifetimes of preparation for eons and eons, developing the characteristics, the qualities, sometimes called the marks of a Superman, in order to have the compassion necessary to turn the wheel for all living beings when it is his time to become the Buddha for a particular historical age. Right? So that kind of gives you the background of what a Buddha is generally, and kind of the preparation for the man who would eventually become our Buddha. In the next video, we'll talk about that final lifetime during which that Bodhisattva, whose journey began so long ago with that Bodhisattva vow in front of Dipankara, will finally reach enlightenment and do so not only for himself, but out of compassion for all living beings, which will truly make him our Buddha as he begins to turn the wheel of Dharma for our historical age.